Chapter 1. How It All Began. It was Sam Sylvester, a teacher at Hawkwood School, who started the trouble. Just along the road from Hawkwood, there was another school called Greycoats. Parents paid a lot of money to send their children to Greycoats, and the children there were clean and tidy, wore expensive clothes, and did well in examinations. At Hawkwood, the parents did not pay any money, and the children were much better at fighting than at passing examinations. They were happy about that. Passing examinations meant hard work, and who wanted to study every evening? But Sam Sylvester was worried about the difference between the two schools. He wanted Hawkwood to be as good as Greycoats, and he was always telling his class to work harder, to try and make a better life for themselves. "That's the trouble with you lot," he said to his class one day. "You don't care about anything." "What do you want us to care about, sir?" asked Humi. He was a thin, serious child who was too small for his age. His real name was Rossiter, but when someone spoke to him, he always said, "Who?" "Me?" Zrania, so everyone called him Humi. "I want you to have ambition," said Sam. "To do things, to want things." "What kind of things, sir?" said Nutty. Her real name was Deirdre McTavish, but everybody called her Nutty. She was 13, had a broken nose, thick glasses, black hair, and a big smile. But you had to be careful with her. She was a good fighter, too. "Anything," said Sam. "Anything at all. Now come on, tell me what you want in life." Nutty put up her hand. "I want to be a rider in the Olympic Games before I'm 21, she said. Nutty loved horses and riding and had her own horse, called Midnight, a present from her Uncle Bean. Midnight had been on his way to the knackers, where horses were turned into dog food. But her uncle, who worked there, had bought Midnight and given him to Nutty. She had cared for the horse, taught him to jump, and now she and Midnight often won competitions. Humi put up his hand too. "Yes, Rossiter? I want to go and watch North End United play football on Saturday, sir." "And that's your life's ambition?" said Sam crossly. "Well, why don't you? It isn't very difficult. It's too far, and my bicycle's broken. You can catch a bus, can't you?" "It's a long walk from my house to the bus stop, sir." Sam covered his face with his hands, and the class laughed. "All right, Rossiter," Sam said. "I'll take you in my car, you and 3 friends." "Oh, thank you, sir," said Humi. And that was how it all started, because on the way home from the football match on Saturday, Sam stopped the car at a pub. "I'm going in here for a drink," he said. "I'll bring you out some Cokes if you want." "Yes, please, sir." The 3 friends with Humi were Nutty, Nutty's cousin David Bean, and a Sikh boy called Jazz. Humi hadn't invited Nutty. She just said, "I'm your friend. I'm coming." Nobody argued with Nutty. The Greycoats school bus was also in the pub car park. Inside it there were 4 boys, drinking Cokes. "Well, that's nice," said Sam. "Now you can all have an intelligent conversation together." "We don't want to talk to them, sir," Bean said. Nutty was looking hard at the Greycoats bus. "That boy with the fair hair and the big nose," she said. "He's Sebastian Smith. He's Gloria's boyfriend." Gloria was Nutty's older sister, a gentle, beautiful girl who always had lots of boyfriends. Nutty pushed her face against the car window, then opened it. "Hi, Seb," she cried. "It's me." Sebastian looked at her coldly, then opened the bus window and said, "Get lost." "Have you been to the match too?" asked Nutty. We've been competing in a tetrathlon. That's a Greek word, so you won't understand it. What is it? A special game for little boys? It's a very difficult competition in running, swimming, shooting, and cross-country riding. Where did you come? Last? First out of 20 teams. Sebastian closed the window. "I could do all that," Nutty said. "Hey, Seb." He opened the window again. "Do they have girls in the competition? They're not strong enough." He smiled unkindly and shut the window again. "I hate that, Sebastian," Nutty said to the others. They waited, not very patiently, for Sam, and after a while, Bean went to find him. He came back shaking his head. "He's talking to that Greycoats teacher, arguing about something." A few minutes later, the two teachers came out, walked over to Sam's car, and looked hard at Nutty and her friends. "What, these four?" cried the Greycoats teacher. "You'll never make a team out of them. One of them's a girl, too. You can't use her. You'll need another boy." "No problem," said Sam. "And we'll beat you." The two men shook hands, and Sam got into his car. "What's all that about, sir?" asked Humi. "I'll tell you on Monday," said Sam. On Monday morning, Sam's class listened with open mouths as Sam told them his news. "Now listen carefully, because this is very important. I want to show everybody that Hawkwood School is just as good as Greycoats School. Some people think that my plan is impossible, but I know we can do it. We're going to enter a tetrathlon team against the Greycoats School team, and I've promised that we'll beat them. The competition is next summer, so we've got almost a year to get ready. It just needs hard work. And the 4 people in the team?" "I know, sir," Nutty said excitedly. "It's because you met the Greycoats teacher on Saturday, so it's the 4 of us who were in your car, isn't it? Except me, because I'm a girl. But can't I be captain, sir? Olympic teams have captains." "Well, all right, Deirdre," said Sam, pleased. "We'll need your help with the riding, so the team will be Rossiter, Bean, and Jazz, and the 4th boy will be Gary Nicholson. He's a good swimmer already." Humi suddenly sat up when he heard his name. His eyes were round with horror. "Who, sir? Me, sir?" he said in a frightened voice. "But I can't swim, or ride, or shoot. I can't do any of those things." "You can learn," said Sam. "You'll have to." Humi, Jazz, Bean, and Gary looked at each other unhappily. "Why us?" said Bean. "It's not fair. We'll never beat Greycoats, never in a million years." But everybody in the school was excited by the tetrathlon plan. Yes, Hawkwood would show that rich Greycoats crowd. Hawkwood for gold. The other teachers thought Sam was crazy, but they agreed to help. The head teacher worried about money for all the sports lessons, but Sam said that the parents liked the idea very much. They would help to pay for everything, and Mr. Bean would find them some horses. In fact, everybody was happy, except Humi, Jazz, Bean, and Gary. Chapter 2. The horses arrive. Soon everybody was busy. The parents put some money together and Mr. Bean started to look for suitable horses at the knackers. Swimming lessons were planned, and later on there would be shooting lessons. Humi couldn't believe that this awful thing was really going to happen. "Well, when we learn to shoot," he said miserably to Bean, "we can shoot ourselves." "No, we can't," said Bean. "Those guns are too small. They wouldn't kill a cat." Nutty, as the team captain, told the boys that they were lazy and just afraid of hard work. "You can do it if you try," she told them. She went with the boys to the first swimming lesson. It was not a great success. Gary could swim well, and Jazz showed promise, but the swimming teacher shook his head. "This is going to need a lot of work," he said to Nutty. "3 nights a week for the next year, and I really don't have time to do it." "But you've got to," cried Nutty. "Someone must." Gary's older brother, Nails, was swimming at the other end of the pool. He could swim like a fish, and he and Gary were at the pool every night. But nobody liked Nails. He was hard and dangerous, and was always in trouble with the police. The others were afraid of him. The teachers hated him, and he had no real friends. Nails and Gary had no mother. She had left home, and they lived with their father, who did not care what they did. But Gary was nicer than Nails, and he laughed and smiled sometimes. Nails only laughed if someone had an accident or got hurt. Nutty was watching Nails. He could swim really fast. Perhaps he could help them. But how could you get someone like Nails to help? Humi hadn't been in the water yet, and the swimming teacher shouted, "Get in, young Rossiter!" As Humi slid into the water, he thought that his last hour had come. He felt the water close over him like death, and he opened his mouth to scream. Suddenly Nails appeared. He caught Humi by the chin and pulled his head up out of the water. "You stupid fool," Nails shouted. "Use your arms." Then he swam away. Nutty stared after him thoughtfully. That evening, Mr. Bean's horses arrived. The plan was to keep them in an old, unused factory on the edge of the town. All the buildings around the factory had been destroyed, and grass was growing where there were once houses. So, after tea, Nutty went down there on midnight. When she arrived, Sam Sylvester and the boys were already there, with some of the parents. They stood in silence as the truck with the horses in it moved slowly down the road and stopped beside them. Mr. Bean got down from the driver's seat, smiling happily. "Here we are then," he said. "They don't look much, but they were good horses once. 3 of them were race horses, and the other was in a circus. He'll be all right if they don't play God Save the Queen. He lies down when they do that." Mr. Bean laughed. "Well, let's have a look at them then. But don't get too excited," he added. "Just give them 3 months with good food and you won't know them." The parents went to open the back of the truck, and Humi stood there, trying to pretend that he did not really care. But why were his legs shaking like that? Perhaps he was really ill. Perhaps he should go to the doctor and, "Mind your backs! Mind your backs!" A very large horse was pulling Mr. Bean down from the truck. It slid onto the road, looked for the nearest bit of grass, and went straight towards it, pulling Mr. Bean after it. Humi happened to be standing on that bit of grass, thinking he was safe. He saw the horse's big, hungry mouth coming towards his ankles, and he jumped back. Then he stood there, unable to speak, as Mr. Bean pushed the horse's rope into his hand. "He likes you. He's chosen you really, hasn't he? Here, he's yours," Mr. Bean said to Humi. The horse was hungrily eating every plant and every bit of grass that it could find. It was brown, and Humi could see all its bones. Its legs were covered with old cuts, and there were some new ones too that were still bleeding. Its eyes were red. Humi stood there holding the rope. He was too frightened to move, but the horse wanted to move on to some new grass. It lifted a foot as big as a dinner plate and put it down near Humi's shoe. Humi jumped. "It could break your foot like that. It's dangerous." "I don't want it," cried Humi, frightened. "Well, you've got it, haven't you?" said Jazz. "I hope mine's prettier." "Yours is the circus horse," laughed Mr. Bean. Jazz watched miserably as Mr. Bean brought out an extraordinary white horse covered in black spots. It wasn't as big as Humi's, but it was as thin. It stood there, looking very sorry for itself and refusing to move. "You don't see one like that every day," said Mr. Bean. "You'll have to call him Spot," he laughed. Nutty sat on her beautiful Midnight, who was very different from these poor sad horses. "It's what you make of them," she said, trying to cheer the others up. "Midnight looked awful when we bought him. You've got to remember that they've come straight from—" But she stopped there. They wouldn't want to remember that the horses had come from the Knackers. Gary and Bean were beginning to worry now. Their eyes were fixed on the truck. Mr. Bean looked a bit worried, too. "This one could give us a bit of trouble," he said. "It's frightened, needs a bit of love." There was a lot of crashing and banging from inside the truck, then a shout and a lot of bad language. A horse shot out and hit the road. It slid round, looked around it with eyes dark with fear, and stood there, shaking. It looked a better horse than the others, but also more dangerous. Gary and Bean stepped back. "Gary, it's the best of them all," said Nutty, getting down from Midnight. "Take it. It's only frightened because of the journey." She spoke softly to the horse. But Gary was as frightened as the horse. His face was white. Humi, watching, felt a bit happier. At least his horse was only large and hungry. He decided to give him the name of Bones. But Nutty was pleased. This one looked like a good cross-country horse. "You're lucky," she said to Gary. "But I want to live," he replied. The last horse was Beans. It had come halfway down from the truck, and it stood there watching them with friendly, sleepy eyes. It refused to move any further, and its front feet were planted hard on the ground. It was a very big, thin, tired brown horse. Just then, Nutty saw her sister Gloria and two boys, Seb and his friend, watching from the road and laughing at the horses. "If you've come to spy, you can go away again," Nutty shouted at them angrily. "And don't laugh at the horses. They may not look much now, but they were all famous once." Humi wondered if this was true. Was his old Bones really a famous racehorse? The parents were busy getting the factory ready, and Humi began to realize that horses made work. Oh well, the parents were probably going to do it all. When everything was ready, the parents stood and watched as the horses were taken into their new home. There were a lot of old fridges in one corner of the factory, and the parents had pushed these together to make walls. Each horse now had its own little stable, filled with deep straw. Bean's horse had been given the name Wizzo because he moved so slowly, but he managed to move a lot faster when he realized there was food waiting for him in his new stable. And when the horses were comfortable and had eaten, a feeling of quiet happiness filled the old factory. Pleased, the parents left. Mr. Bean started up the truck, shouted good night, and drove away. The 4 boys were alone with Nutty. "Right. That's it for tonight," said Nutty. "Tomorrow you'll have to give the horses their food and clean them out." The boys looked at her in surprise. "Us?" "Yes. I'll meet you here at 7 o'clock. 7? I get up at 6 for midnight, and I'm only a girl, so be here at 7, or there'll be trouble." And she got back on midnight and rode off. Chapter 3. The end of the competition? That night, Nails and Gary decided to go and look at Gary's horse. It was after midnight, and it was cold. A thick, gold moon was coming up over the sea, and everything was silent. Gary pushed back the big doors, and moonlight filled the factory. The horses were quiet. 3 of them were lying down, but Gary's mare was on her feet, walking about, and Gary and Nails stood and watched her. "She's pretty," Nails said after a time. "What are you going to call her?" "I don't know." "Well, you'll have to think of something." "Come on," said Gary. "It's after midnight, and I've got to be back here at 7. "You're crazy," said Nails. But a few nights later, Nails went back to the factory. It wasn't comfortable at home now his mother had left. There were no meals, no warm fires to sit by, nothing. So late one evening, he decided to go and have another look at Gary's mare. When he closed the factory doors behind him, he was filled with a feeling of peace. He listened to the gentle sound of the horses eating. Gary's mare stopped when she heard Nails, and her ears went back. "What's the matter, beautiful?" Nails said. "Don't be afraid. You're all right, you know. You're not on your way to the knackers now." He sat down quietly beside her. Her life was a little like his, he thought. And while he sat there, the mare seemed to grow calmer. She pushed her head forward to look at him, but when he moved, she jumped back, afraid. Then, slowly, she put her face near his again, and he felt a wet tongue on his hand. Nails was pleased. "You like me, don't you?" he said, and he could see that she did. Well, she was lucky. They were going to kill her, but now here she was, warm and comfortable. They should call her Lucky. Lucky something. He lay back comfortably while he thought about it. The other horses moved about quietly, and it was like being in a family by the fireside. What about Lucky Fireside? No. Firelight? Lucky Firelight? Lucky Lady Firelight. That was it. It was a good name. He wished he could ride her. Well, perhaps he could. He could learn to ride, couldn't he? But the others mustn't know. The next morning, Humi went up to the factory early to feed Old Bones, and he found Nails asleep next to the brown mare. "I'll kill you if you tell anyone," Nails said. Humi didn't tell, but he thought it was very strange. And Nutty was very interested to find that when they went to the riding school for their first lesson, Nails, unsmiling and silent, went along with them. The horses at the riding school looked strong and healthy, with shining coats. They were also smaller and much easier to manage than their horses at the factory. Humi didn't have to worry about watching out for Bones's big feet and his ever-hungry mouth. But he wanted to be able to ride Bones, and he enjoyed his first lesson very much. Nutty just stood by the wall with Nails and Mr. Sylvester and watched. She could see Humi was not a natural rider, and she realized how hard it was going to be. They had several months before the competition, but their own horses were old and tired, and her team was awful. After the lesson, Nails walked with Nutty to her bus stop. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Will you teach me how to ride?" He spoke almost angrily. "I'll pay you," he added, "but I want it to be a secret. Don't tell the others, or I'll kill you." Nutty was silent with surprise, but she agreed, and a week later they met for their first lesson. Nails was angry most of the time because he hated taking orders from anyone, but he learnt quickly, and Nutty agreed to continue with the lessons. 2 weeks later, one afternoon after school, the teacher from the riding school came to look at the knackers' horses. The horses were taken out, and the boys walked them up and down while the teacher watched. "You must be crazy," she cried to Sam Sylvester. "You can't use these horses. You'll have to use mine, and with the lessons that'll cost you £50 a week from now until the summer." Nothing happened for almost a week after that, but then Sam called the team together. "The school has decided that £50 is too much," he told them. "The competition was a wonderful idea, of course, but the riding's too expensive. There are the swimming lessons as well, and we haven't even started the shooting yet. No, it's all too difficult. The competition's dead." Chapter 4. The new team Bean and Gary were pleased. Jazz did not say anything, and Humi was very happy, until Nutty told him that the horses would have to go back to the knackers. Nutty was wildly angry. "Isn't that just like adults?" she said. "They tell you to do things, they get all excited, and then suddenly say it's all too difficult." But Humi was thinking about Bones. He was no longer frightened of his large, hungry horse, and he knew that Bones was really a very friendly animal. It was a nice feeling when Bones pushed him gently with his nose, asking for the sugar in Humi's pocket. Humi realized, very strongly, that he did not want Bones to become dog food. "They can't kill poor old Bones," he cried. "And what about Nails? What will he say about Lucky Lady Firelight? He sleeps in her stable every night now." Nutty looked at Humi. "Now, there's an idea," she said softly. "Nails. He could be in the team. He's going to be a good rider, and he's an excellent swimmer. He can teach the rest of us. And I'll be in the team too. Never mind that rubbish about not having girls. I can ride better than anyone at Greycoats." She turned to Humi, her eyes bright with excitement. "Will you go on with the competition, if that will save Bones?" she asked. Humi thought about it. "Yes," he said slowly. "Yes, I will." Nutty went to find Nails and explained her idea to him. You had to be careful with Nails. He could get very angry for no reason. It was hard to like him. Nails looked at Nutty coldly. "They won't want me in their team," he said. "It's not their team anymore. It's us, our team. If we want to do the competition, they can't stop us. And we can beat Greycoats. I know we can." She waited hopefully, but Nails said nothing. "Your brother Gary and Bean aren't interested," Nutty said. "But Jazz will go on, I think, and Humi, and it's the only way to save the horses." "Okay," Nails said at last. "I'll do it." He did not look at Nutty, and walked away, his hands in his pockets. Jazz agreed to the plan as well, but said the riding was too difficult for him. Nutty began to worry and decided to go and see what Uncle Bean thought. "Well, I think that riding teacher was a bit hard on your horses," he said. "After all, you only want to ride across country for a mile or two. You need that niece of hers, Biddy Bedwelty. She'd teach you all in a week. But she's a famous competition rider. She wouldn't teach us," replied Nutty, "and her lessons would cost an awful lot." "Well, offer her Wizzo instead of money," said Uncle Bean. "You can ride Midnight, so you don't need a fourth horse." To their surprise, Biddy agreed to help them, not for Wizzo, but because she liked doing things that seemed impossible. "You needn't pay me if you win," Biddy said. "And if we lose?" asked Nutty. "Then you have to pay me for 6 months' work," Biddy replied, and she agreed to come 3 times a week for 2 hours each time. Nutty knew that Biddy's lessons cost £10 an hour, but there was no other way. Uncle Bean agreed to pay for the horse's shoes and food. "But I want my money back if you lose, like Biddy," he said to Nutty. "Add it to the bill," Nutty said crossly. "It's only £1,440. Who's worrying about a few hundred more?" Uncle Bean shouted with laughter. "With a bill like that, I guess the 4 of you will work harder than you've ever done in your lives." And they did. They began to work at their running. They ran to and from school, and down to the old factory where the horses were every morning and evening. They had riding lessons with Biddy 3 times a week, and went swimming as often as they could. Swimming lessons with Nails were not easy. His way of teaching was very frightening. His idea was that if you put someone who can't swim into deep water, he'll have to swim to stay alive. At their first lesson, Humi could only swim about 3 meters in shallow water. "Get in," Nails said to Humi, "but it's the deep end. You just get in here and swim to where you can stand up." Humi turned to run. Nails caught him, fastened his thin arms round the shaking body, and jumped in with him. Nutty was watching and tried not to scream as the water closed over Humi. But Humi came up again with Nails beside him. "Swim!" Nails shouted in his ear, "or you'll die." Humi moved his arms about wildly. Nails turned on his back and slid in the water in front of Humi, watching him and pushing his big toe under Humi's chin. "Come on, you stupid fool, or I'll hit you." Humi tried. He didn't want to die. He swam, keeping up with Nails's feet. Every time he started to go down, Nails pulled him up with his toe. Then just when Humi thought he really was going to die, Nails's foot pulled him up out of the water, and with a quick push, stood him up. The water was halfway up his body. He looked round and saw that he was 3/4 of the way down the pool. "Not bad," said Nails carelessly. And he left Humi looking down in surprise at how far he had swum and went over to Jazz and Bean. But the lesson with Jazz was not so successful. Nails decided to teach Jazz how to turn. He was standing on the side of the pool, and as Jazz swam up to him, Nails put his foot on the back of Jazz's head and stepped in, taking Jazz's head with him and making Jazz turn over beautifully. But Jazz did not seem to think that this was a very good idea, and he hit out at Nails under the water. He caught Nails across the face with a ring he wore. Water and blood flew about wildly everywhere and made Nutty think of films about man-eating fish. She heard the sound of wet feet running along the side of the pool as everyone came to watch. but Nutty turned away. She did not want to see. She heard shouts, bad language, and more shouts. Then the lifeguard saw what was happening and jumped into the water. Suddenly, 2 bodies flew through the air and came to rest on the side of the pool, helped there by the lifeguard's large hand. "And don't come back for a week, Nicholson," he shouted after Nails. Nails turned his bloody, angry face on Nutty. "Is that what you want, then?" he cried. "Shut up, Nails. You frightened him. Don't get angry. You're a great teacher, but go easy on them. Get changed and I'll buy you a Coke." She waited for the boys, bought them something to eat, and calmed them down. By then it was raining heavily, and Nutty still had to take midnight out for his ride. She ran to catch her bus, tired of having to do everything for the others. Lessons with Biddy were also hard work. It didn't matter if it was raining or snowing. They still had the lesson. Nails could make Firelight do anything for him now. They had a very special feeling for each other. And when Biddy wanted Nails to change horses, he refused. Nutty's sister Gloria was still seeing Sebastian Smith, and Nutty was pleased about this. She wanted a spy in the Greycoats team. One evening, Gloria told Seb all about the new team, while she and Seb were sitting in the back seats in the cinema. Seb sat up suddenly and looked at Gloria in surprise. "What?" he said. "Nutty's in the team? And that terrible Nails? He can swim like a fish. And Colin, in our team, isn't a good swimmer at all. And Biddy Bedwelty is teaching them riding." "I don't like this," Seb said. He sounded very unhappy. "I don't like it at all. We never thought that Hawkwood would beat us. But your sister Nutty is really dangerous when she gets an idea in her head. I think our team is going to have to do some serious hard work."